Assalamu alaikum. Hello and welcome everybody to the Halal Times YouTube channel. It's a pleasure for me to introduce our very special guest for today's show. His name is Professor Dr. Kevin Haines. He got his PhD degree from Cambridge University. Currently, he's working as the head of social policy for Bedford Row Capital. They got a platform which is called Al Wasila, which is an award-winning Sharia-compliant issuance and securitization platform. It's trying to democratize Sukuk-ish investing. Let's talk to Professor Haines. Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate the time you've taken to speak with us today, sir.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. And sir, recently you published an amazing article on the synergy between ethical, sustainable finance and Islamic finance. What is the synergy you've been talking about, sir?
I mean, essentially, if you're looking at ESG very broadly speaking, or if you're looking at the SDGs, the Social Development Goals, the overlap between that whole movement and Islamic finance is almost complete. It's a Venn diagram in which the bit in the middle is absolutely huge. So the synergy is really intrinsic to Islamic finance and things like the SDGs and the broad ESG field.
And sir, while doing some preliminary research about this interview, I was kind of amazed to know that you did your PhD in criminology from Cambridge, and you're still teaching this subject at various universities, not only in the UK, but in other continents as well, in Africa as well. But apart from this, you're also an expert in ethical finance and Islamic finance. How did you develop an interest in this relatively new field to you?
Well, I returned to the UK from University of Trinidad and Tobago at the start of the pandemic and at the start of the shutdowns.
Yes.
And a friend of mine, Dr. Scott Levy, the CEO of Bedford Row Capital, said, well, why don't you come on board and help us with our ESG? And so we started off, well, I have to say, he's the real expert. I mean, if you want somebody to talk expertly about Islamic finance, talk to Dr. Scott Levy. I'm just the pupil in all of this thing. But we met with Islamic scholars who struck me as being really, really smart guys. I started to learn about some of the principles of Islamic finance. And we were also talking to a company in Bangladesh about a fairly big issuance. I needed to learn more about Islamic finance from that perspective. And it just strikes me as being absolutely the right thing that we should be doing. I think the world has arrived at the current position we're in, where we have a health crisis, an economic crisis, an environmental crisis, because of the last 40 years of unregulated capitalism and its decoupling from social issues. Islamic finance is intrinsically linked to social issues. That seems to me to be one of the big hopes for the future, is that we can build on the linkage between finance and social issues. If we can't do that, we're in serious trouble. And not just the social. I mean, the social is important to me because of my background and my academic work, but also the environmental, which should be of a concern to all of us, really.
You're working as the head of social policy for Bedford Row Capital. And what does your company do, and what your responsibilities at this company are?
Bedford Row Capital is essentially a debt structuring specialist. So we sit between companies and investors, and we issue bonds which are structured by Bedford Row, which we have proprietary technology which manages those relationships. We're not investors ourselves. We don't do any direct business. We just sit between the bonds and the investors, and we structure those deals in a very effective way. My role is partly to ensure that Bedford Row Capital as a company internally is doing all of the right things in terms of ESG, the SDGs, good governance, that kind of thing. But also to work with our clients to try to ensure that we are it's not our job to become consultants to advise them on how they should respond to the raft of regulations that are coming out.
Okay.
But it is our job to help them to be aware of those things and to maybe offer some initial guidance as to how they might best either begin their journey into sustainability, etc., or to further their journey into sustainability.
Are you targeting specifically the people based in the UK, or it's a global platform which you're offering to the customers?
We are very much have a global outlook. We have clients obviously in the UK and broader Europe, but also in Asia, in Australia, in Bangladesh, as I've already mentioned. We have clients from all over the world, and they tend to be SME. The big banks are not really interested in working with things that they consider to be small beer. But these small beers make up the majority of any country's economy, and they're actually quite significant. They're really important companies. So we're trying to fill a gap in the market by working with companies of a kind of middle range size.
For the last few years, we've been hearing a lot of terms, and to most people, it might be confusing to hear the term ethical finance, Islamic finance, and sustainable finance. So do you think there is any difference between all these terms, and are they meant to serve the same purpose?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the only thing that's reasonably well defined of the three is Islamic finance. We know what that is. Ethical finance, do we really know what that means? Certainly talking about sustainable finance. We could debate for years what is sustainable and what isn't. Having said that, there are overlaps between ethical finance, Islamic finance, and sustainable finance. There are areas of synergy that we should be exploiting, we should be aiming to grow. It's not necessarily problematic that we don't really understand what is ethical or we don't really understand what is sustainable. We're never going to understand those things because the relationships are incredibly complex and they're very chaotic. We're in finance, we're accustomed to a kind of linear relationships. It's X plus Y equals Z. In the real world, in the sustainable world, X plus Y equals A, B, F, G, R, and M, N, O, P. I mean, it's all these things. But there are synergies between them. We need to identify what they are and to help them to grow. That's our view.
And sir, what's the missing piece of the puzzle, and what do we need to do to bring about the kind of growth in financial markets, which a lot of people were expecting a couple of decades ago?
Talking specifically about growth in Islamic finance, then I think that the first thing we need to do, we need to demystify and delabel it a bit. I think to traditional Western finance houses, to people who work in finance, it's a whole different language that they're not familiar with. And they're a bit confused by it all and a bit kind of not sure about what to make of it or how to understand it, how to approach it. So we need to delabel it and to demystify it. But then one of the things that Bedford Row Capital really tries to do is to make an impact. It's great. We need to talk about these things. But talk is cheap. We need to take action. We need to actually do it. And one of the things Bedford Row tries to do is to make a difference, to have an impact. And so that one of the articles that we've written recently was about how you need an issuer and a structurer in order to make these deals real. You can't just imagine it to be real and it happens. You need to issue bonds based on Islamic finance principles, and you need a structuring agency like Bedford Row to make those deals real, to make it actually happen. And that's what drives us, making it happen, making a difference. The regulation that's coming in the EU, in the UK, in other jurisdictions around the world, I mean, getting on top of that, those regulations, working out who they apply to and in what way. This is an immensely challenging task, particularly SMEs, because and individuals. I mean, if you're looking at some of the work we do with the Islamic scholars, they're one person. They don't have a team of 50 people to work on these issues to decide on what's the best way of dealing with it. The SMEs that we work with are, 4 or 5 people who are engineers or business people. They're not experts in sustainability regulation. And it's vast, enormously challenging exercise. And we're trying to help in a small way with that. Unless we deal with fossil fuel, unless we deal with the depletion of the oceans, and unless we deal with the global social inequalities, none of this is going to make any difference at all. These are big global-sized issues that we need to deal with. And as a small finance company, that's quite difficult for us to think about, how can we make a difference to these big global issues? I think that's a source of the stress of a lot of people that are working in finance. How can they really make a difference given the enormity of the issues that we need to tackle? We've a very short period of time in which to grapple with this stuff. It just on the climate change issue. The scientists are telling us that we've got 10 years.
Right.
That's not a long time to make major changes. And that's just on the climate, as I'm saying. If you're looking at the oceans, if you're looking at biodiversity, I think I read somewhere that 23 species went extinct in the US last year. We're talking about 10 years for the climate. In terms of deforestation, in terms of what we're doing to the land, in terms of what we're doing to the oceans, we need action now. We need to be doing things now that make a real difference. And there are people who are taking action and making a difference.
And so you mentioned that most of your customers, they are SMEs, very small companies, teeny tiny companies. So how do you reach out to those people?
We're talking about deals sometimes in the 50 to 250 million range.
Okay. Right.
They're not the really small corner shop types. They tend to be companies that are bigger and more ambitious than that, but not big enough to attract the interests of the banks. So I think it's growing amongst Asian banks, the willingness and ability to finance things, but it's still a struggle for companies. And that's where we think we can help out.
Do you think that maybe you would be able to discuss specifically about the kind of services, maybe a bit more specific, more detailed discussion at what kind of services you've been offering to your customers?
It's really relatively simple. What Bedford Row Capital does is structure the deal.
Right.
So we have a bond, which is frequently, most often, it's floated on one or other of the stock exchanges.
Okay.
And the Al Wazila, for example, is the issuer of the bonds. They contract Bedford Row Capital to structure the deal. And so Bedford Row Capital then puts in place all the necessary structuring arrangements, all of the legal agreements around the investment, the payment schedules, and all of that. We have a set of proprietary software, which is extremely transparent as far as financial matters go.
Okay.
If you're an investor, with our software, you can see on a daily, if you can do it hourly if you want to, see exactly what's happening with the investment that you've made. Is very reassuring for investors, particularly when they're investing in things that might not be their traditional areas of investment, let's say. And we basically, we take care of everything. Bedford Row Capital takes care of everything. We make sure that the payments are made to the investors on time. We make it as easy as possible for issuers to issue bonds, for us to structure the bonds, and for investors to invest and to understand everything and to be happy with the outcomes that they get.
Right.
In essence, that's what we do. It's not massively complicated. It fills a gap in the market because, as I said, the banks aren't interested. The big investment houses aren't interested in in some of the kind of the deals of the sorts of size that we do.
Right.
So we're filling a gap in the market. In addition to Al Wazila, which is specifically an SPV designed to promote Islamic finance, we have other SPVs as well. We have a sustainable capital SPV, which looks at trying to develop and promote sustainable projects.
Well, sir, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time you've taken to speak with us today. Hopefully, we can catch up with each other sometime later as well. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Nice meeting you. Thanks. Bye-bye, sir. Thank you. Bye-bye.